Growing up, I spent a lot of time home alone. My mom was a single parent for most of my childhood, working long hours as a nurse, often on grueling overnight shifts. My older brother had gone off to college, so it was just me holding down the fort most nights. I was used to it, but there were still moments that unnerved me, especially on nights like this one. It was a weekend, and my mom was working an overnight shift. I had invited over a girl I was talking to at the time, Molly. We spent the evening watching movies in the living room, enjoying each other's company. But eventually, she had to head home. Her parents were strict about her being out late. So around 11 p.m., I walked her to the door, said goodnight, and watched as she drove away. I wasn't ready to go to bed just yet, so I went back to my room and continued watching TV. My bedroom was on the second floor, overlooking the backyard. The night was quiet, and the house felt still, almost too still. That's when I heard it, the sound of one of the chairs on the deck being dragged across the wooden floorboards. The noise was unmistakable. I got up from my bed and went to the window, expecting to see Molly down there, maybe having second thoughts about going home so early. But when I looked out, it wasn't Molly. Instead, there was someone else, a figure sitting in one of the deck chairs, their face obscured by the darkness. My heart skipped a beat as I realized I didn't recognize this person. In a shaky voice, I called out Molly's name, hoping it was just her playing a prank on me. The figure looked up at me, but it was definitely not Molly. Panic set in as I ducked away from the window, my mind racing. Who was that? What were they doing on my deck? I quickly texted a few close friends, asking if any of them were messing with me, but the responses came back negative. None of them knew what I was talking about, and they all seemed just as concerned as I was. Deep down, I knew it couldn't have been any of my friends. They wouldn't do something like this. Despite my fear, curiosity got the better of me. I slowly crept back to the window and peeked out again. The person was still there, sitting in the same chair, but now they were looking directly up at my window. It was a man, that much I could tell, and he was staring at me intently, as if waiting for something. I pulled away from the window again, my mind racing the possibilities. Should I call the police? Should I confront him? I was too scared to think straight. Instead, I turned off the TV and sat on my bed, curling up into a ball with my arms wrapped around my knees. I didn't want to make a sound, didn't want to do anything that might draw more attention to myself. My bedroom window was open, and I feared he might hear me if I so much as moved. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as I sat there in the darkness, my mind replaying the image of that man sitting on the deck. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Surely, he had to be gone by now, right? I gathered up what little courage I had and slowly made my way back to the window. But when I looked out, my heart sank. He was still there, still staring up at my window. The fear that had been simmering inside me erupted into full-blown terror. I forced myself to speak, to ask him what he wanted. My voice shook as I called down to him, but all I got in response was silence. Then his shoulders began to shake. At first, I thought he was having some kind of fit, but then I realized he was laughing. It was a silent, wheezing laugh that sent chills down my spine. He was laughing so hard that he was barely making any sound, just a faint whistling as he gasped for breath. "Please go away," I begged, my voice trembling, but he didn't answer. He just continued to laugh, the sound growing fainter as he seemed to enjoy the fear he was causing me. I couldn't take it anymore. I backed away from the window and ran to my bedroom door, slipping out into the hallway. I sat at the top of the stairs, listening intently. That's when I heard the sound of the back door being pushed, as if someone was trying to open it. My blood ran cold. He was trying to get into the house. I scrambled back to my room, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. I was 14 years old, alone, and terrified. I didn't know what to do. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but for some reason, I was too scared to pick up the phone. I just sat there shaking, praying that the man would give up and leave. The next sound I heard was the front door's doorknob being jiggled, followed by the sound of someone trying to force it open. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the noises stopped. He had given up, thank God. I stayed in my room, too scared to move, until my mom came home around 9 a.m. When I finally told her what had happened, she was furious with me for not calling 911. In hindsight, I know she was right. It was incredibly stupid of me not to call for help, but at the time, I was paralyzed with fear. Looking back on that night, I still question why I didn't do more to protect myself. I was a skinny, weak kid, not a fighter by any means. If that man had gotten into the house, I don't know what I would have done. All I know is that it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and it's something I'll never forget. I live in a two-story house with my sister, but it's designed as a mother-daughter home, meaning it has two separate kitchens, one upstairs and one downstairs. My sister lives on the ground floor while I occupy the upper level. She often stays with her boyfriend, who lives about 20 miles away, so I frequently find myself home alone. At 30 years old, I'd like to think I'm beyond getting freaked out when I'm by myself, but sometimes I still get that uneasy feeling, especially at night. This particular night, I was home alone, lounging on the couch in the living room, watching a horror movie. My part of the house has an open layout, so the living room, dining room, and kitchen are all one large space. My couch is positioned in the middle of the room, facing the TV, which means my back is to the rest of the space. For someone who's easily spooked, it's not the most comforting setup, especially when you're watching something scary. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, feeling the darkness behind me pressing in as the only light came from the TV screen. After the movie, I went through my usual routine, brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights, and went to bed. I fell asleep quickly, but my rest didn't last long. I woke up abruptly around 1 a.m., disoriented and unsure of what had roused me from sleep. As I lay there in the dark, trying to get my bearings, I heard it, a voice from downstairs. It sounded exactly like my sister's voice, and it was coming from inside the house. At first, I thought she might have come home unexpectedly, but the more I listened, the more I realized something was off. She wasn't calling for me to open the door, which would have made sense if she had just arrived. Instead, it sounded like she was already inside, maybe even arguing with someone. Still groggy and not thinking clearly, I got out of bed and stepped into the pitch-black hallway. I fumbled for the light switch, flipping it on to cast some light into the darkness, and then made my way through the living room, following the sound of her voice. As I descended the stairs, I could hear her more clearly, calling my name from somewhere below. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the bottom of the stairs and groped for the light switch in the foyer. My mind was foggy and I was struggling to think straight. Finally, I found the switch and flicked it on, illuminating the small hallway that led to her kitchen. The light was dim at first, slowly brightening the space, but even in the faint glow, I could see that no one was there. Not her boyfriend, no one. Panic started to set in as I realized the voice I had heard was unmistakably hers, yet she was nowhere to be found. I walked through her apartment, checking every room, but they were all empty. I called her name loudly, hoping for a response, but the only sound was the echo of my own voice. And then, just as I was about to head back upstairs, I heard something drop to the floor in her bedroom. The noise sent a jolt of fear through me. I had just checked her room and knew it was empty, so what could have caused that sound? Fear gripped me as I turned and bolted up the stairs, not bothering to look back. I ran to my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed my sister's number. It rang several times, but she didn't pick up. I tried calling her again and again, but each time it went to voicemail. I was left sitting in my room, locked in, trying to convince myself that I had imagined everything. But the sound of her voice had been so real, so vivid. I was wide awake now, and every little noise in the house made my heart jump. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I fell back asleep, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. When I woke up the next morning, I saw that my sister had texted me, asking why I had called her at 1 a.m. My heart sank as I read the message. I quickly responded, asking if she had been home last night. She replied that she hadn't, that she was still at her boyfriend's place and hadn't returned at all. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read her words. What had I heard last night? I went back downstairs to her bedroom, half expecting to find something out of place, something that could explain the noise I had heard. But everything was exactly as it should be. Nothing had fallen, nothing was on the floor that could have made that sound. It was as if the entire incident had been a figment of my imagination, but it felt too real to dismiss as a hallucination. The vividness of my sister's voice, the sound in her room, it all felt so real. And that's what frightens me the most. I want to believe it was all in my head, that there's a rational explanation for what happened. But deep down, I can't help but wonder if something far more sinister was at play that night. This is the story of how I almost died as a kid home alone, and it's probably the most intense night of my life, with way too much going on at once. We were a family of 5, me, my older brother, my younger sister, and our parents. At the time, I was 10 years old, my brother was 14, and my little sister was just 5. It was a Friday night, and my brother was out with his friends, probably getting into some kind of trouble, as older brothers tend to do. I was in my room, playing a Star Wars video game, completely absorbed in my own little world. That's when I heard my mom start freaking out downstairs. Her voice was loud, panicked, and filled with fear. I paused the game and rushed out of my room, my heart pounding. When I got to the living room, I saw my mom on the phone, her face pale and tear-streaked. She was talking to someone at the hospital, and from the bits of the conversation I could hear, I realized something terrible had happened to my brother. Apparently, he had been hit by a car, and they were rushing him to the emergency room. My dad was trying to calm my mom down, telling her that my brother was going to be okay, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. They were both scared out of their minds, and it was starting to rub off on me. My parents quickly got their coats and bundled my little sister up in her jacket. They asked me if I was okay staying home alone, and I nodded, trying to be brave. I didn't want to go to the hospital to see my brother hurt, and I think my parents didn't want me to either. They were in such a rush to get out the door that they didn't have time to think about what might happen if I stayed behind. So they left, and I was alone in the house. The silence that followed was deafening. My mind was racing, filled with worry for my brother, but I tried to distract myself by going back to my video game. Hours passed, and the house grew quieter, the shadows in the corners of the room growing longer and darker as the night wore on. It was after midnight when I heard the front door open. I had been so engrossed in my game that I didn't hear the car pull up or my parents coming up the stairs. I turned off the TV and PlayStation, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. My brother must be okay if they were back home already. But then I realized something wasn't right. I didn't hear my parents' voices, didn't hear them calling out to me or talking to each other. The house was still eerily silent. My heart started to race again as I walked to my bedroom door and slowly opened it, peeking out into the dark hallway. I made my way to the top of the stairs and looked down into the living room. The lights were off, but I could make out the shapes of 3 tall figures standing there. They weren't my parents, and they definitely weren't my brother. A wave of terror washed over me as I realized these were strangers in my house, intruders. I was frozen with fear for a moment, my mind struggling to process what was happening. Then, as quietly as I could, I backed away from the railing and slipped back into my room, closing the door behind me as gently as possible. I knew the sound of the door clicking shut wasn't quiet enough. They had to have heard it, even if it was just a slight noise. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I hurried to my closet, opened the door, and slipped inside. I crouched down behind a pile of boxes and bags, trying to make myself as small and hidden as possible. The darkness inside the closet was suffocating, and I held my breath, waiting, listening. It felt like an eternity before I heard the sound I was dreading, the creak of my bedroom door opening. Footsteps entered the room, slow and deliberate. I couldn't tell how many people there were, but I could hear them moving around, searching. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying they wouldn't find me, praying they would leave. But then the footsteps came closer to the closet. I could hear the rustle of my bedsheets as they searched my bed, and then there was silence. Silence except for the sound of my own breathing, which I tried desperately to control. And then the closet door opened. I didn't dare move, didn't dare even breathe. I was crouched down behind the boxes, trying to blend in with the shadows, praying they wouldn't see me. The door stayed open for what felt like an eternity, but I kept my eyes closed, too scared to look up. Finally, after what must have been 20 seconds of sheer terror, the door closed again. The footsteps moved away, and I heard the intruders leave my room. I stayed in the closet, too terrified to move, too scared to even think about what had just happened. It wasn't until an hour later that I heard the sound of my parents' car pulling into the driveway. I bolted out of the closet and ran downstairs, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get to them. The front door was left ajar by the intruders, and as I reached my parents, I could barely get the words out to explain what had happened. My parents were horrified. They quickly checked the house and discovered that several valuables had been stolen: electronics, jewelry, even some cash. The intruders had been there to rob us, but all I could think about was how close I had come to being discovered, how close I had come to something far worse happening. In their rush to get to the hospital, my parents hadn't locked the door. It was a simple mistake, one that could have cost me my life. I was lucky, so incredibly lucky, that the person who opened the closet didn't see me or decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Even now, I still think about that night, about what could have happened. I wonder if the person who opened the closet door saw me hiding there and chose to spare me, or if they were just there to rob the house and nothing more. It's a question that haunts me to this day, and I don't think I'll ever have an answer. If you've made it this far, you're 100% a horror fanatic, and we approve. If you love our campfire-themed horror storytelling experience, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our daily uploads. There was a time when I was left home alone for an entire week, a rare occasion since my parents didn't go out much. But this time was different. My mom's wealthy friend, Patty, had invited my parents on an all-expenses-paid trip, and they jumped at the chance. Being an only child, I was left to take care of the house by myself. We lived in a quiet, wooded area in Newark, Ohio. Yes, Newark is in Licking County, and yes, the name always gets a laugh. Our house was set back from the road, surrounded by trees, with a large deck overlooking the woods in the backyard. It was peaceful, serene even, but also a bit isolating, especially when you were alone. It was a Thursday night in July 2013, and I remember it well because I had been making plans with friends for the weekend earlier that day. The evening was warm, and I decided to sit out on the deck with some music playing, enjoying the summer air. I had a small speaker with me, blasting some tunes while I relaxed, occasionally taking a hit from a joint I'd rolled earlier. That's when it started. At first, I thought I heard a voice coming from the woods, faint and distant. I lowered the music and listened, but the voice didn't repeat itself. Figuring it was just my imagination or maybe some kids playing in the distance, I turned the music back up. But then I heard it again, a voice calling out from the woods, closer this time. I immediately turned the music off and strained to hear. It was a male voice, calling out, "Hey, over here." The voice was coming from the woods, about 20 to 30 yards away from the deck. My first thought was that it was just some kids playing around, maybe a game of hide and seek or manhunt. But as I sat there, listening, the voice called out again, "Hey, over here, we need help." The tone was different this time, more urgent, and definitely not a kid's voice. It was deeper, older, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "Who is that?" I called back, feeling uneasy. The response came almost immediately. "We just need help. We're stuck in the woods." Now, I was starting to feel genuinely concerned. Who gets stuck in the woods in the middle of the night? It didn't make any sense. Despite my better judgment, I got up from my seat and walked down the steps of the deck, making my way toward the edge of the yard. The voice called out again, "Right in front of you. I see you." That statement made me freeze in my tracks. How could they see me so clearly, and why couldn't I see them? My instincts were screaming at me to turn back, to get away from the woods. Something wasn't right about this situation. I started walking backward, not daring to turn my back to the trees. As I moved, the voice didn't say anything else. If they were truly in trouble, they would have called out, would have asked where I was going. But the silence was more telling than anything else. They knew I was onto them. I made it back to the deck, my heart pounding, and quickly went inside the house, locking all the doors behind me. I sat in the living room, trying to calm myself down, telling myself it was probably just a prank, someone messing with me. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. And then I heard the voice again, this time much closer, coming from the backyard, not the woods. I heard the sound of water splashing, either in the pool or the small fish pond. I rushed to the window, peeking through the blinds, but at first, I didn't see anything. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. There was a man, at least I think it was a man, hiding behind the pool on the other side. I could only see his head, and even that was difficult to make out in the darkness. He had dark, medium-length hair, and he was grinning, as if this was all some kind of sick game. I immediately closed the blinds, my mind racing. Whoever this was, they weren't here for help. They were here to mess with me, or worse. I tried to ignore it, hoping they would lose interest if I didn't give them any attention. But my breaking point came when I heard a loud, aggressive banging on the window, right where I had just closed the blinds. Help! The man screamed, but his voice was filled with malice, not desperation. It was clear he was enjoying this, enjoying scaring me. I snapped. I screamed back at him, telling him to get lost, that the police were on their way. I tried to sound as crazy and aggressive as possible, hoping to scare him off. To my horror, I heard him start to laugh, a deep, sinister laugh that echoed through the night. The sound began to fade as he walked away, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I sat back down on the couch, shaking uncontrollably, trying to calm myself down. The house was quiet again, and it seemed like he had really given up. But I couldn't shake the fear, couldn't relax. I didn't sleep much that night, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have happened. The next morning, I checked the yard, but there was no sign of him, no sign of anyone. That night changed me. It made me more paranoid, more cautious about who I opened my door to, about the people I trust. I still wonder what would have happened if I had gone into those woods, if I had fallen for his tricks. But one thing is for sure, I'm never going to let my guard down like that again. I'm 23 years old and still living at home with my parents. One day, they were both out, and I decided to play some basketball in the front yard to pass the time. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and everything seemed perfectly normal. As I was shooting hoops, something made me stop and look up at the house. One of the upstairs windows caught my eye, and I froze. There was a woman standing there, staring down at me. It wasn't my mom, and it definitely wasn't my sister. This was a complete stranger. The moment she realized I saw her, she quickly ducked away from the window. My heart started racing, and I immediately ran inside. I searched the house from top to bottom, checking every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot, but there was no sign of her anywhere. I even checked the basement, though I doubted she could be down there. The basement was small, with only a couple of couches, a bar, and 2 closets. There weren't many places for someone to hide. But still, I yanked open the closet doors, expecting to find her there. But there was nothing, just coats and hangers. I was so confused. I knew what I had seen. There was no way I had imagined it. I had definitely seen that woman watching me from the window. Frustrated and scared, I went back to the main floor and yelled at the top of my lungs, telling whoever was in the house to get out. I screamed so loud that our next-door neighbor heard me and came over to check if I was okay. I told him everything, that I had seen a woman in our house, that she had been watching me from the upstairs window. He helped me search the house again, but we found nothing. Eventually, we came to the conclusion that she must have slipped out through the back door when I ran inside. I had left it unlocked when I went to grab the basketball from the yard, so it was possible. After my neighbor left, I locked all the doors and called my parents, telling them what had happened. They weren't too thrilled about the situation, but they asked me to make sure nothing was stolen. I did a quick check, and thankfully, everything seemed to be in place. That night, I was still on edge. I checked the house one last time before going to bed, just to be sure. But even then, I had trouble falling asleep. My mind was racing, replaying the events of the day over and over again. Most people can't relate to the experience of seeing a stranger inside their own home, and the thought of it kept me awake for hours. I finally started to drift off when I heard a noise, a faint rustling sound coming from the other side of the room. At first, I thought it was just the fan above me, but the noise persisted. It sounded human. I slowly turned over and my heart nearly stopped. There she was, the woman from the window, crawling out from under my bed. She stood up, towering over me, her eyes wild with some kind of crazed energy. I screamed louder than I ever had before, louder than when I had yelled at her earlier in the day. I jumped out of bed and tackled her to the floor, my adrenaline giving me strength I didn't know I had. I grabbed her by the throat, demanding to know who she was, what she was doing in my house. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was my neighbor again. I dragged the woman to the front door with me, her nails clawing at my arms, leaving deep scratches that would later turn into scars. When I opened the door, my neighbor immediately stepped in to help restrain her. Together, we managed to hold her down while I called the police. The whole time we waited for the cops, the woman was screaming, cursing at us, threatening us. She looked and acted like someone who was high on something, maybe meth. Her eyes were wild, and she kept twitching, unable to stay still. When the police finally arrived, one of the officers recognized her immediately. Apparently, she was well known to them, a local troublemaker named Karen, of all things. They had dealt with her multiple times before. Watching her get hauled off in the back of a police car was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. My neighbor stayed with me for a while afterward, just to make sure I was okay. I thanked him profusely for his help, and he assured me that he was just glad he had been there. That night, I still couldn't shake the feeling of satisfaction. Yes, I was freaked out. I mean, who wouldn't be? But there was also this overwhelming sense of relief, of having stood up to someone who had invaded my home, who had tried to terrorize me. I don't think I'll ever fully understand why she was in my house, what she was after. But I do know one thing. I won't let anyone scare me like that again.